special presentation here's my nursing take on it. You can be so good and get your advance directives done, and you could have had them done years ago. But we change as people, and our health changes, and our relationships change, and our values might be changing. So it's never out of style to talk about advance directives, and I'm really glad you're here. My name is Kimberly Bailey. I am the Life Plan Community Nurse here at Estates and also at Highland Farms. I'm usually here Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. My office is on the second floor of Asbury, and I'm across from the billiards room. And did you know you can come and see me on Monday, Wednesday, Fridays from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock? You can walk in and have your blood pressure taken or ask a nurse a question, and I'm glad to help. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. That's a really wonderful thing. This morning, I wanted to let you know we're going to be recording the presentation. This is such good material, and it's part of our CARF objectives that we like to fulfill, providing this education about advance directives. So this will be recorded. There'll be time to ask questions, so feel like that will be something that you are free to do. Our speakers, I'm very picky when I invite speakers. I like to invite folks that are easy to approach, who speak common language so that they're not hard to pick apart, and they have expertise that is needed. So I have two wonderful people to introduce to you this morning. Let me turn around and see what we're doing. Oh, yes, thank you. We have wonderful vendors with us this morning. These are community providers that are here in Asheville, and I have met them and think that they are absolutely amazing, and I'll go around the tables afterwards and introduce you to them. So our presentation should last about 60 minutes, and afterwards they are staying to be available to visit with you. So as we go around and introduce, I want you to feel like you can come and talk to them later. They're here for you. And with that, I would love to introduce you to Brian Lawler. He is an attorney, and his law group is Forest Law Group. And I really like his presentation. I've heard him before. And what I think is he's super approachable. He has excellent a body of knowledge that can really support you. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Brian. Thanks for being here.
Thank you all so much, and thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me okay? All right, I've never been accused of being too quiet or of not talking enough either. So I'm going to move around a little bit, but I'll try and stay where I'm at. I just can't ever stay still. So thank you again for having me. So my name is Brian Lawler, and I'm an elder law attorney with the Forest Law Group. It's a law practice I started a couple years ago, or about a year and a half ago, after leaving a bigger practice here in town. So what is an elder law attorney? I'll just tell you that real quick, and why does that matter? Why am I the person that was here to talk to you today? So elder law is its own specialty. It kind of comes out of the umbrella of estate planning. So if you think about estate planning sort of being a big, umbrella, then there's a lot of sort of subspecialties underneath that. And elder law, elder and special needs law, is one of those subspecialties. So the difference is that, or what I like to think of the difference is that unlike traditional estate planning, which is really focused on the efficient and effective transfer of assets from one generation to the next, elder law attorneys are focused on you preserving and protecting those assets as best you can so that you can live the highest and best quality of life that you've got while you're living it, with sort of that secondary consideration of those ungrateful kids who never call you on Thanksgiving or Christmas, right? So we care about those kids. Yes, we care about them. I have some. I hope they call me on Christmas or my birthday, but I know they're going to forget. And so, they'll be fine, right? We gave them all that we need to give them, and they'll be good. So we focus primarily on you, and we want to focus on you living your best life, whatever that means to you. and sort of having and taking control and charting that own path for yourself. So a little bit different than traditional estate planning, although I would say we do a lot of traditional estate planning in my office as well. So, you know, if all the traditional things that you may already have in place, or if you don't, maybe you should have in place. But anytime we're talking, we're also saying, yeah, you know, that's important. Let's figure out that will thing. Let's maybe figure out that trust thing if that's what you want. But let's also focus on, you know, like getting older and maintaining control of your life while you're getting older. So some traditional estate planning, we focus a lot on protecting assets for long-term care. So we worry about long-term care and paying for long-term care and the expense of all of that. We work with people with special needs, or adults who have children with special needs, and then we are also looking at and planning for incapacity. So planning for incapacity is kind of why we're here today, and that's one of the things that we're talking about. When we talk about advanced directives, what we're thinking about is planning for that time in our life when maybe we lose the ability to make decisions for ourselves, or we lose either completely lose that disability, or that ability rather, or we start to suffer some kind of, you know, decline in our ability to sort of make and formulate those decisions for ourselves. And so we are worried about that, and that's one of the things that we focus a lot on, and really what we're going to talk about today. But one of the things I want to mention kind of preliminarily is that, you know, getting older is tough. You may know that. I sometimes find, I found there's funny meme recently that said, you know, I'm one sneeze away from being paralyzed. And it feels that way some mornings when I get out of bed. I feel like I've developed some new injury while I was just sleeping. I didn't know that I was so active in my sleep. But apparently I am, because I'm sore in ways that don't make sense the way that I went to bed. And so it's tough. And the reality is that it's not something that we should be doing by ourselves. It's kind of an all hands on deck process. And it takes a village, folks. You know, we've heard about it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a village to get old. And so you've got an incredible community here locally, not just here specifically at Gibbons, but just here locally. And all of those people that are sitting around this table, they are part of that village for you. And so that village is there to help you sort of, you know, people like to use all kinds of sort of, you know, fancy sayings, age gracefully, or age on your own terms, or chart your own path. I use them myself. So, but the idea being is maintaining as much control, as much dignity, you know, and charting that path for ourselves, and where we want to go, or how we want to live, and how we want to go out, right? So we are talking today about, you know, dying. Yes, I'm sorry. We are going to talk about that. I don't know if that's news for you, but unfortunately, it's going to happen to all of us. And so we're going to just talk about it. We're going to talk about it really openly because, you know, it's coming for all of us, unfortunately. Or at least most, I don't know, maybe it's not coming for you. Maybe you know something that I don't. But we want to talk about how can we maintain that say for ourselves when we can no longer speak for ourselves. And so that's really where this idea of advanced planning or advanced directives come into play. So I should have asked, how many of you have advanced directives in place currently? Oh my gosh, all right. Thank you so much. It was good talking to you. Geez, wow. So I'm talking to a crowd of experts. That's great. So I don't know. Maybe I won't tell you anything. Maybe you're saying, oh my gosh, this guy, I've heard all these things before. But that's awesome, and that's really excellent that you do. And so maybe I'll say something today that maybe you think, oh gosh, maybe I should rethink that plan. Or you know, as was mentioned before, it's important to revisit these plans from time to time. The decisions that you may have made 20 years ago may not be the decisions that you want to have now. And so sometimes it can be helpful just to look at them again. So what is advanced planning, or what is an advanced directive? It comes in a variety of forms. There's some legal documents that we're going to talk about today, some legal things that you can do. There's also some medical documents that we're going to talk about today that I'm not going to talk about, but that also help you kind of evaluate that full picture of getting older and eventually dying, and what is that process, what is that going to look like for you, and what do you want it to look like? So I think I would say, and I've said this to everyone I meet with, I say this in a lot of groups that I speak in, is that, in my opinion, the advanced directives that we're talking about, and that when I say that from a legal perspective, I'm talking about powers of attorney. So a general power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney, and I'm talking about a living will or an advanced directive. To me, those are the most important documents that you can have in your estate plan. So is a will important? Yeah, I think a will is probably important. Is a trust important? Usually not, but it might be fine and it might be good. But is an advance directive, is a power of attorney important? 100%. And the reason is because it is the document that deals with you while you are still alive, right? So again, yes, do we care about those kids? Yes, maybe we do. We probably, hopefully, maybe we care more about the grandkids because they're just so stinking cute. So do we care about them? Yes, absolutely we do. It's important to take care of yourself as well. So that's why I think they are probably more important, or rather the most important. So if you do nothing else, if you hear nothing else from me today, it's take a look at those advance directives again. Pull them off the shelf, pull them out of that big, thick green binder that they sold you, 10 years ago with that really thick paper, because thick paper is more expensive, so that's why you got to charge a lot for it. But pull that back out again and take a look at it and make sure it says what you want it to say. Make sure you understand what it says. Like if you're looking at it and you're like, I don't even know what these words mean, then maybe it's time to reevaluate. But the underline of all of this, and I'll keep saying this, and it'll sound like a broken record, but it's maintaining control when you don't, or you feel like you've lost control. So it's making decisions now for yourself, and to prepare for a time when you can neither make those decisions for yourself, or you're losing some of that quickness in your step, but in your brain. So as I mentioned, there's two types generally of powers of attorney, and that's what we want to kind of spend some time on. So the first one is called a general power of attorney. Sometimes it's called a durable power of attorney. Sometimes it's called a general durable power of attorney. Sometimes it's called a financial power of attorney. People like to use all kinds of fancy names for it, but essentially it's all the same. So a general or a durable or a financial power of attorney deals with the money. It deals with anything financial, anything that's going to hit your wallet. So it's legal issues, it's insurance issues, it's money issues, it's real estate, it's any of that stuff that we have. And what makes it somewhat unique is that you don't have to be incapacitated for it to work. So you can have a power of attorney and allow or appoint a person to help act on your behalf if you are incapacitated, and I think that's really important. But you can also just let someone do it because you just don't want to do it anymore. So if you're just like, well, I don't know, my kid really is excited about paying my bills every month. Sure, I'll let them pay my bills every month. I've been doing it for them their whole life. Might as well turn the table a little bit. So you're welcome to do that. Or if you say, I'm going on a big trip. I'm going to take a cruise around the world. I don't know, whatever you're going to do. And I need someone who's on the ground here to kind of make sure that the lights stay on or the bills get paid. Then that person can step in. But a general power of attorney, it's structured such that you are the principal, you're the person in charge. You will always be the person in charge. And then you appoint somebody called an agent. It used to be just called the power of attorney, and that was sort of confusing because the power of attorney was both the document and the person. So now they changed the name and they said, well, we have a principal and we have an agent. And just like those terms kind of mean, the principal is in charge and the agent acts on your behalf. The agent is not allowed to do anything that you do not want them to do. It's very important that you hear that. Giving someone your power of attorney does not mean you giving them your power. It just means that you're giving them the ability to stand in your shoes and act on your behalf if A, you can't do it for yourself, or B, you just don't want to do it. So it's different. It doesn't mean that you've given up anything. It doesn't mean you've given away your rights. It doesn't mean that this person can go rogue and start doing things that you don't want them to do. The great thing about a power of attorney is just as easy as it is to create one, it's just as easy to take it away. So you can revoke it at any time as well. And you can do that until such time as a judge says you can't. And it's only a judge that says you can't revoke it or can't get rid of it. So until then, you are the person in control. But the goal is to be able to have, sort of allow another person, like I said, to step into your shoes, to be able to do things on your behalf, things that you would otherwise do for yourself. So there's kind of within the vein of general powers of attorney, there's two kind of general types. One is called, at least in North Carolina, one is called the North Carolina Statutory Short Form Power of Attorney, which is just that. It's a very short form. So it's not a complicated, it's not a, some sort of magical language. It's like a form that's like 3 pages long or 4 pages long. So it's a power of attorney that is intended to be sort of all things to all people at all times in their lives. And so it was written by the state legislature. You can actually look it up online. It's baked into the statute. I mean, they've given you, this is what the form looks like. You can print it off, you can sign it, and you can notarize it, and you've got a power of attorney. It is, I will tell you, and this is sort of, I don't know, maybe other attorneys wouldn't want me to tell you this. I don't care. Is that is the form that probably 90% of estate planning attorneys are using. And they're just doing that. They're printing it offline. They're making it look fancy. They're putting their logo on it. But essentially, it's the North Carolina statutory short form because it's very limited, and it is intended, like I said, to be kind of all things to all people. So some pros of that is that it's typically free, or it should be really close to free. It should be really inexpensive to do those because you can just go get it yourself. But the downside is that it's severely limited as to what this agent, what this person acting on your behalf can do. And which maybe makes sense when you're 20 and you don't want to give, someone just sort of carte blanche authority to do whatever they can or whatever they want to with your money or your assets. But as we get older, that doesn't make so much sense anymore. That limitation doesn't really make much sense anymore. And depending on how we intend to live the last years of our life, depending on what our long-term care plans are, we really might need the agent, the person you've given that authority to, we might need them to have a little bit more power, a little bit more authority, a little less limitation. And unfortunately, that statutory short form doesn't really provide for that. It doesn't provide for that sort of expanded authority. So then the alternative is just a purely customized power of attorney. And so in my world, we use that latter. We don't use the statutory short form because it's just too limited. So for example, I'll give you an example. Like sometimes when we're thinking about long-term care and how am I going to pay for it and trying to figure these things out, one of the things that I need to do, and oftentimes I'm working with kids because at this point maybe you don't have the ability to do it for yourself anymore, is we got to transfer some assets, and we're going to transfer those assets from husband to wife. And that's all I want to do. I want to move all the assets from mom to dad. Well, under the statutory short form, I don't have any authority to do that because I'm capped at transfers of less than $14,000. Right, because that's the standard default in North Carolina. It's not 14. It changes every bit. I think this year it's 17, but it's based on complicated, whatever. It's based on the tax of how much you can give away in a year. That's what it's based on to the IRS. So that is not particularly helpful to me when I need to move the ownership of a piece of real property from 2 joint owners, mom and dad, to just dad or to just mom. Because chances are that property is worth more than $17,000. And so it's limiting in that way. Or I can't move bank accounts around, or I can't move, life insurance. I can't do things with life insurance because that's limiting. So as a result, that short form is not particularly helpful in an aging environment. And so we need a power of attorney that's got much more expansive authority, but limited. So it's not just, hey, you can give all my stuff away for whatever reason. You can make moves. You can do things more than you might have been able to before, but it's got a bunch of guardrails built around it. That makes sense, kind of. Anyway, so that's really, there's sort of that 2 particular types. And so if you're ever talking, or if the next time you go back to visit your attorney, which I hope you do, or if you have one, then you may, and if you're thinking, gosh, does this power of attorney make sense in this time in my life? Does it make sense? It made sense 20 years ago, but does it make sense now? And sort of rethinking that. So what type do you need? Do you need a short form, or do you need a more customized? Well, that, every good attorney will tell you the answer to every question is, well, it depends. Depends on your situation. It depends on what your long-term care plan is. It depends on what your assets are. It just depends on your kids. It depends on whether you trust those kids. It depends on who you're going to name to do that for you. Who's going to be your person that's going to do that for you. It all depends on those things and what kind of limitations you want to place on their authority. The last thing I'll mention about general power of attorney, and I say this about everything, is kind of like maintaining a deep bench if you can. And what I mean by that is, so appointing a person to be your power of attorney, you're giving them some responsibility. You're giving them some potential responsibility, and you're giving them a potentially hard job to do. So the most important thing you can do when naming that person is to pick somebody that you really trust to do the job. Do not pick them because they're your oldest child. Do not pick them because they're your youngest child. Do not pick them because they're your best friend and you think that they manage money really well. Don't pick them because you're your neighbor and you're like, my neighbor's really rich. He must know something about money. Those are bad reasons to pick a person to manage your funds for you. It's much better that you pick somebody that you truly trust to step into your shoes, that's going to do the things that you want them to do, that's not going to go rogue and do things that you don't want them to do, and that will continue to listen to you and continue to work with you. So whoever that is, if it's your best friend, great. If it is one of your kids, great. It's, whoever it is you want it to be. If you can, it's great to usually have, one or two people that could back that person up. Because, the person you name may die before you. They may get into a car accident. They may just not want to do it. I don't know. Just because you've named them doesn't mean they have to do the job. So if you can have a deep bench, that's great. And if you can't, that's okay too. But if you have a couple people you can name, that's great. The way the general power of attorney works essentially is you've got the person that you name, and they do the job until they can't do the job anymore. And then the next person does the job, and then the next person does the job. It's a little different on the healthcare side, but on the general side, on the financial side, that's how it ultimately works. So that's the general power of attorney, or the financial power of attorney. The other type is a healthcare power of attorney. Kind of sounds like what it says, what it sounds like. It is a power of attorney for healthcare decisions. So that as well is a standard form. The healthcare power of attorney is a standard form. It is put out by the state of North Carolina. Again, it is baked into our state legislature. It is not a customized form per se. It gives you a lot of ways to customize it, the form itself, but it is just a form that exists, and you can go get it if you want. It only, unlike a general power of attorney, it only comes to life. It only matters. It only becomes effective when you lack the capacity to make decisions for yourself. So it does not, like if you're like, I'm perfectly capable of making decisions for myself, but I've named this, my daughter as my healthcare power of attorney, and suddenly she's now going to talk to the doctor and saying things I don't want her to say. That's not how it works. The doctor's going to talk to you first. You are the primary person in charge making those decisions. It's only until you lack the capacity to make or communicate those decisions does a healthcare power of attorney come into play. Unlike the general power of attorney, you can list it, you can list as many people as you want as your healthcare agent. Here's first, here's second, here's third, here's fourth. You can name 10 people if you want. But unlike the general power of attorney, in the healthcare side, if that first person doesn't pick up the phone, then the second person can be called, and then the third person, and the fourth. So it's not you do the job until you can't do the job. It's you do the job unless you don't pick up the phone, and then I'm calling the next person, I'll call the next person, I'll call the next person. So when you're naming people to act as your healthcare power of attorney, it is also equally important to name people that you trust, that you've talked to, that can make those decisions, but also don't name as a number two like that kid that you have that you're like, I don't really trust them now, but I think I might in a few years. That's not a good reason to name them as number two, because they might be the person who gets called if number one can't do the job. So you want to be careful there. It provides sort of universal or umbrella coverage of healthcare decisions. Anything from I'm taking mom to the doctor and they're asking me, does she want to take an antibiotic or not, to, effectively pulling the proverbial pulling the plug. So anything in between, from most simple to most complex, this person has the authority to make those decisions for you if you can't do it for yourself. And then within the document, there are exceptions that you can put into that. So if there are certain things that you're like, I want to give them authority, but I do not want them to have the authority over X, whatever that may be, there's a place usually in the document that you can write those things in. And that's happened in a variety of ways. I've seen it mostly in people who have a mental health history, and they have very specific ideas about mental health treatment. They have specific medicines they like, they have specific treatment modalities that they like or they don't like, and so that's one area. I've seen it again also more recently. I've seen this a couple times now. It's happening more and more recently of people who are really averse to autopsies, and I think it's because of, honestly, I think it's because they may take their life into their own hands, if you know what I mean. So we're seeing that a lot more. We've seen, ways in which, I don't want my body disposed of this way. I want to make sure it's cremated. There's a few different places you can put cremation in, but that's one of them. And so my point is that it's a large umbrella document that allows for a lot of authority, but you can restrict it as much as you want. That's a long way of saying that. A healthcare power of attorney has to be signed by you, of course. It has to be witnessed by two independent people. So that's people who are not related to you by blood or marriage or who have any beneficial interest in your estate, right? Kind of makes sense. You don't want to leave someone in your will and then give them that power to effectively make that will happen a lot sooner, right? So you don't want to give them that authority too soon. So they can't be anyone who's going to benefit from your estate, generally. So those are important considerations when thinking about who I'm naming as my power of attorney. I'll mention really quickly, there is a document called an Advance Directive for Mental Health. So if you have a mental health history or your family has a mental health history, and that is a kind of its own beast, it really digs deeper into mental health specific issues, treatments, medications, that kind of thing. So if that is important to you, or that is something that you're dealing with, or that your spouse is dealing with, that may be something you want to consider as a specific advance directive for mental health. And then the last one is what is just called an advance directive, or a living will. And so that living will throws people off because they're always like, oh, I have a will. And then you're like, okay, well, tell me about it. And they're like, well, it says that I don't want any life-prolonging measures put in place. That's not the same thing. So it's a living will or an advance directive. But essentially, it is a document, again, is a statutory form. Again, exists in the statute. Again, you can just download it yourself. You can print it off yourself. It's nothing specialized. Now, I happen to just, put it on my own paper, I guess. I don't know. I don't like all the statutory language in it, so I take a lot of that stuff out. Sometimes it gets really complicated and confusing. So I simplify it a little bit, but generally it is a free form. It deals with specifically end-of-life situations, and more specifically, whether and to what extent you want life-prolonging measures put in place in 3 specific scenarios that it outlines. Now, I say specific scenarios, but they're specifically vague scenarios. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. I'm not going to talk. We're going to talk about a little bit why they're vague or how they're vague and how you can make them more specific. But it's things like, for example, if you have an incurable or an irreversible condition that to a high degree of medical certainty will result in your death in a relatively short period of time. Does that sound like some serious lawyer talk right there? Yes, it does. So everyone asks me. They asked me yesterday, what does relatively short period of time mean? And I say, I don't know. People die all kinds of. Some people die fast, some people die slow. It's just, the point of it is that it's less about the relatively short period of time, and it's more of, I have an incurable condition that is going to result in my death if I don't put life-prolonging measures in place. And those life-prolonging measures are generally artificial means of sustaining life without otherwise which you would die. So artificial hydration through an IV, artificial feeding tube, artificial nutrition through a feeding tube, artificial breathing with a ventilator. Something that if you don't have it, you're probably not going to last too long. And so and because of some incurable or irreversible condition that you have. So that's one example. Another is if you're unconscious and there's pretty high certainty that you're not coming back. And then the third one is which is a relatively newer one, which is if you have advanced dementia or any other condition that results in a substantial loss of cognitive ability, and what it doesn't say, and I wish it would say that more specifically in the document, but it doesn't, and without some life-prolonging measure, you will die. So it's not just, hey, I've got dementia and I'm thirsty and my kids are just not going to give me a glass of water. That's not what we're talking about. If you can drink or you can eat and drink, that's not what this is. This is my health has progressed so far because of this issue that my body is essentially shutting down, and without some sort of artificial intervention, it's going to result in my death. So, and then within those scenarios, in those categories, you have a couple of choices. Those choices being, to what extent you want to give someone else the authority to make that decision about whether life-prolonging measures should be put in place, or whether you want to make that decision now. And if you make that decision now, then it should, ideally, communicate that decision, your healthcare agent, whoever's your advocate is going to be communicating that decision to your future doctor. It might be the doctor who's treating you now, and it might be the doctor 5 years from now who's dealing with you in the ER when you show up. I have seen the Advance Directive used most effectively kind of as I call it as a sword. It's really a tool for the healthcare agent to come in and say, listen, physician, I know that you want to treat this patient this way, but I have an Advance Directive that says you need to stop doing that. So that is where I've seen it used most effectively. It's not to say that it's not used in other ways, but that's where it becomes most effective. You know, your physicians, your docs are going to want to do everything they can to promote life. I mean, that's just what they do. That's like their charter, right? But in some cases, you may have made a decision to say, I don't want that. And so your advocate needs to have that document, that legal form that says, I don't want this anymore. And we're going to talk about how that can be used in conjunction with medical documents as well to really support those advanced decision-making that you're making. So that's the living will. That's what I want to say about that. It is intentionally vague, but it's because we can't make it all things to all people. And so in an attempt to make it all things to all people, we have to keep it vague. That's how it's worked. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll get off because I've been talking for a long time. The last thing I'll say is you got to talk to your people. I don't know who those people are to you, but whoever they are, please, you got to talk to them. And you got to talk to them sooner than later. And I know that those conversations might be really tough. It might be a really awkward conversation around Thanksgiving dinner. Hey, kids, this turkey tastes really good. Can we talk about my death? And I don't want to talk about how much you're going to get and how much I'm leaving your sister. And that's not what I'm talking about. We're not talking about that. You'll find out when I die that you're getting nothing. But what I want to talk about is how I am going to die, how I intend to live out my last years. And it is very important that I talk to you about this because I don't want there to be any question. You know, there's the worst question you can have is, I don't know, what would mom have wanted? What would dad have wanted? Well, that's not just your kid's fault. That's your fault. You should have told them what you wanted. They should be explicitly clear. And either you need to write it down in some way and say, hey, go find the envelope when I go, or when I'm really sick, or you just got to talk to them about it. I shared this last time on Monday, and I'll share it again. One of the best gifts that my mother gave me when she was dying, and she had cancer and died way too young, but she was sick over about a year's time. And during that time period, she was very specific. I have 6 siblings, and so she was very specific with each of us. She brought us all in and have very frank conversations about how this is going to go. And you're not going to like it, but this is how this is going to go. And so you need to let your dad, because I've already told him how this is going to go, you got to let him off the hook. And even if you disagree with him and what he's doing, I'm telling you this is what I want. And so that was important. But it was also for her really important to tell us what the funeral was going to look like, what hymns were going to be sung, what readings were going to be read. She did make us go. She said, what is the funeral party favor going to look like? That was really important to her too. She was a big fan of this drink called whiskey slush, which was like whiskey and like orange concentrate and stuff. It's really good. And she was a big fan of that. She was a big fan of that in the last days of her life as well. It's really funny. But she's a big fan of it, but it's got a couple different kinds of liquor and some other recipe. And so my wife and I at the time had to go out to 5 different liquor stores throughout Forsyth County to get as many airplane bottles of whiskey. And we looked like people in rough shape, I think, probably to those people. But the point of it is that when the time came, when she passed, we just got to grieve my mom. And there was no question anymore about what was going to happen. She had planned everything, and she had communicated everything to us. And it was truly the greatest gift she could give us. So I know that, Thanksgiving's coming up. Maybe this is the time. Maybe Christmas is coming up. Maybe that's the time. Or some other time you just want to get on the phone and say, hey, let's talk about this. And whether it's your kids or it's your neighbor, it's your friend or whomever, say, I need you to know what's important to me so that when the time comes, there's no question. And that's all I'll say about that. Thank you all so much. Yes,
Brian, thank you so much. Actually, yeah, let's do it now.
Okay, sure. Yeah, sure. Yes. Sorry, yes.
How about asking to be put on hospice or palliative care? Does that help ease the... I can't hear.
Yes, so she asked a question about what about hospice or palliative care, putting yourself on that. And I suspect we're probably going to talk about that on the medical side, because those are going to be more medically based decisions. But again, it's part of the conversation for sure, but it's not necessarily something specifically baked into the legal side of it. Yeah? Yes, so that.
So for people without family or financially savvy friends, what would you suggest about choosing a power of attorney and also looking for elder law attorneys?
Sure, great. So she was asking if people who don't have kids or don't have those close financial friends, sometimes we call those elder orphans, which is a terrible name, but I don't know, that's what they get called. Sorry, I don't know if you knew that, you were an orphan. Is your name Annie? No. What do we do there? So, I will say there are a couple of services in town. There's some folks in town. I was looking around for Paula's not here. All right, it's a great lady named Paula who you can get her contact information. So she actually provides some of those services. She's a nurse and provides healthcare, power of attorney, and guardianship services for people who don't have that necessarily for themselves. And she's awesome and really good at it. But the point is that she's got that medical background, so she can really help you process kind of thoughts and what you need and desires and things like that, and then help put those things into place. Her name is Paula Kelly, thank you.
You can connect with me. I have all of her contact information, and I would love to connect you.
And there's a couple of folks like Paula in Asheville that do that kind of work and will help you and can help in that way. Likewise, on the financial side, there are some firms that do have sort of a fiduciary arm where they will provide or help provide power of attorney services or financial fiduciary services. I do that from time to time for clients who same kind of thing where they just don't have anybody. I don't do it a lot, but sometimes it's like, hey, I don't have anybody else and I need someone to do it. So I've certainly done that before. The last question about elder law attorneys, I'll tell you there's probably about 5 of us in Western North Carolina. It's not really being taught in North Carolina law schools anymore, so there's it's somewhat of a profession that is not growing exponentially. I would say there's probably about 5. There may be 10 or so that say they do it. They put it on their masthead, but they're the ones who just call me when they have a problem. So, I think it looks pretty, but ultimately there's probably about 4 or 5 in the area. There's a couple different, you can look us up. There's a lot we're usually listed in a lot of aging resources, sort of directories. Certainly find us on Google. Or other search tools, but I think you want to kind of ask, there's some membership, I could talk to you more about what that might look like, but yeah.
Are there any special things you could mention about executors, or is that a whole other?
So I only mention this about executors. That's really dealing with your will, or you're kind of like the end, like after you're now gone, who's going to be in charge. But like a power of attorney, like the people that I talked about, the person you name as the executor is someone you got to really trust is going to do the job and is going to do it fairly for your family. Now, they're going to be overseen by the court, so they can't screw up too bad, or they can't screw around too bad, right? They'll get in trouble if they do. But generally, it, again, wants to be that person or people that you believe can really do the job. I think the other thing is worth mentioning is it's not a very glamorous job. It's actually a really challenging job. It can be difficult. And so it's not like it gives a person any kind of special power or authority over your stuff. It actually places more of a burden on them because they are now being looked at by a judge or a court to say, are you doing this correctly? And that can be an added level of pressure that they may not want. Yes? In the back. Yes?
Okay, the person that goes to battle for you after you die, something to do with probate, what's the name, what's that title called? And also, I've heard both ways, that everybody goes through probate, or you can avoid going through probate. I just want to know which is accurate.
Sure. So the person, she was asking, who's the person that basically goes to battle? I like that, goes to battle, yeah. Love to think that I do that. Goes to battle after you die and is sort of facilitating the probate process. That is your executor. If it's a person named in your will, it's generally called the executor. If you don't have a will, then that person is called the administrator. But that's what it's called. We don't use the executrix or executor anymore. It's just all kind of one title. And then the difference, what will I tell you in like 30 seconds or less? I think probate is not entirely necessary. It can be avoided in a lot of ways. You just have to be planful in how you want to avoid it. Probate is also not like the big bad P word that everyone makes it out to be either. So it is not a particularly complicated process. It's just it's a long process. It averages about, I'd say, at least 4 months if you're like on it, but usually about 6 months to a year that your estate would be probated. So it largely depends on who you intend to leave your stuff to and whether you want to give them that added complication. It also depends on what you've got. And in some cases, some assets are just always probated. There's just nothing you can do about it. They just are. Your car is one of those things that like inevitably gets probated because people don't stop that. Anyway. All right. Sir. Yeah. Oh, gosh. Oh, my gosh. All right. Yes. Yeah.
I was told that if you're in a situation, for instance, congestive heart failure and struggling with oxygen and all of that, that if you're an independent living, you can choose to stop eating. But if you're in assisted living or critical nursing, that the state law will not allow you to do that.
I've never heard that before. Sorry, the question was if you are in some sort of congestive heart failure or some other condition that is likely to result in your death relatively soon, I assume, that if you're in independent living, you can choose to stop eating, but if you're in assisted living or nursing care, that you are not allowed to make that choice, that essentially they're going to force you to eat? Is that what you're saying? I've never heard that before. I've never heard that you can force someone to do something against their will. Certainly having an advocate or having a healthcare agent or some other advocate if you don't want to eat, I honestly have never heard that before. I've never heard that there's a state law that says they have to force you to eat.
I was told that if you get into palliative care early and your wishes are documented, then you have a better chance. You have a chance. And there's actually there are 3 beds up at Center for Conscious Living in Dying.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be in an independent space to do that. Anyway, I'm sorry if it's not state, but I was actually told that in a meeting.
I don't know. That's a new one for me. I'll look into that. I'm not aware of any state law that would say that they can force you to eat. Now, I suspect if you don't have the advance directives in place and you find yourself in a medical setting, the chances are the physician is going to try and compel you to stay alive. They're going to take whatever extraordinary measures might be necessary to keep you alive, which might include feeding you if you otherwise would not have done it on your own. So maybe that is what they're making reference to, but certainly having an advance directive in place that says I don't want those things and I'm not going to do those things certainly would be helpful. Yeah. Oh gosh. Yes. Yes.
You talk about witnesses,
Yes.
they would be,
Yes.
but all of us around here are not good witnesses because we might outlive them. So how do you find a good witness?
So the witness, like if the witness dies before you, I mean that's okay. The witness really only comes into play if the document gets challenged. Sometimes we then have to find that witness. I certainly have had plenty of witnesses who have passed away, who just aren't there anymore. When I'm probate, I'm dealing with some document, I'm trying to prove the efficacy of a document, and the witnesses are gone, or we don't know, we can't even read their signature, so we don't know who they are. But generally, the witness is intended to be able to verify in that moment that you have capacity, that you know what you're doing, that they're not related to you, that you've sort of communicated in some effective way, that that these are the decisions you've wished for. That's really kind of the role of the witness, more so than somebody who has to come back later on and testify. Sorry, yes, you have a question. Okay.
One of the big problems that I ran into as a practicing physician was somebody who laid out explicitly what they wanted. No particular feeding problems or anything like that. And one of the children disagrees with all this.
Mm-hmm.
And it can delay the demise of the person for quite some time.
So he was saying that what he saw as a practicing physician of folks who laid out very good plans, but then at the time when it came time to execute those plans, there was a child who disagreed and then really delayed that process. I'll say 2 things, and I would say, I'll say one thing. I guess that is why I think it's so important to have those conversations with your kids now, to kind of stave off those potential issues. If you start having that conversation now and you have a child who's suddenly disagreeing with the decision you're making, then you may not want to name them as your person. And you want to make sure that the person you do name knows, hey, I've got this child who is not going to agree with my choices, and I'm going to really need you to go to bat for me. Maybe I'm going to have to talk to my attorney and make sure my attorney can step in if necessary as well. So it's having those advanced conversations with people that's going to probably most effectively deal with that. That said, all you have to do is this is terrible to say, but like all I know I have to do is threaten a doctor, I'm going to sue you, and they'll back way off. And nobody wants to get sued. Everyone, it's a terrible thing, and it's a terrible thing, but that exists, but it certainly is, it can happen. It's not 100% fail-safe is my point.
Thanks for all your questions. I'm gonna pause. Thank you.
I'll be
Thanks,
here for a while,
Brian.
too, after.
Brian's going to stay after, and I wanted to assure you this is such a great topic that I want to comfort you with. We're not done. We can come up with creative ways to keep this going. So I do want to give time to Kelly, though, because she's going to really speak to our thoughts from a clinical perspective, and her presentation is just as valuable as Brian. And again, both will remain afterwards, so you can approach them with questions. So please welcome Kelly Kendall. She is a nurse practitioner with Memory Care, and she's really great at unpacking the clinical side and talking about some forms that are really important. So take it away, Kelly. I'm going to leave this. You need it. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Excuse me. All right. Good morning. Can you guys hear me? Short people problems. All right. Can you hear me okay? All right. I understand that there's a service for a resident spouse, so if you need to step away, please feel free to do that. This is recorded, because I know there's just a lot of important things going on at Givens right now. I want you to be able to do whatever you need to do. Like she said, I'm a nurse practitioner with Memory Care, so I help folks who are maybe having memory loss, and those people, it's even more important that we plan ahead while they can give us direction and have capacity to do things. But whether you have memory loss or not, these are all very important conversations to have with your family. So my objectives today are to, number one, make sure you know why it's important that we plan ahead. Brian's done a great job of laying that foundation. But I also want you to learn how to make the medical decisions. We can document them. He talked about the legal side. My job's to talk about the medical side, because before becoming a nurse practitioner with Memory Care, I worked at Mission Hospital on their palliative care team. And I sat with families every day who had not had these conversations, and now we're in really tough spots trying to help them figure out what to do. And then lastly, talking about considering who should know about these decisions. So a lot of that kind of overlaps with Brian, so I'll skip over that part a little bit. Why it's so important to plan ahead. Like Brian said, the day comes for all of us, whether we want to talk about it or not. At some point, our body fails. And so the problem is that the default from a medical standpoint is to do everything possible, full steam ahead, full resuscitation when your heart stops. And that may be what I call your philosophy of care. By philosophy of care, I say we're all on some kind of a spectrum. On this side, I am someone who I want a natural passing. I don't want a lot of heroics. I want it to be as peaceful at home as it can be. On this side of the spectrum is someone who says, I'm going out with a fight. I need to know I did everything I could do, and that's how I want to do my final days. Neither is wrong. It's just important that we know, as your medical team, how to support you with your philosophy of care, because it's a very individual choice. The second problem is that there is a lot of complex medical decisions. Do we do this or do we do that? And I think especially maybe in your generation, your doctor told you what to do and you did it. That is not how medicine is now. We give you a 14-page options plan and say, what do y'all want to do? And that's very unfair, in my opinion, for a lot of folks to not be able to give you, this is what you should do. Especially when it comes to some end-of-life care. Because of that continuum, we try to be very respectful of everyone's choices. So that often makes it very complicated. And when you're in the hospital, that's not the time that you're thinking clearly. That's not the time that emotionally people are thinking clearly. I have seen some wonderful families just unravel over the loss or anticipated loss of a loved one. And so I know Brian touched on it, and I'll touch on it again, but being able to give this gift to your family is super important. Okay, we're going to skip over this part a little bit. Who's your person? The only thing I would add to that is that it's important that you understand we are not a common law state, meaning that if you've lived with your significant other for 45 years, no matter their gender, it is a matter of they don't have the legal decision to make choices for you. So if you don't have a marriage contract with them, then they might as well be your best friend. And when it comes to legal decisions about your health care. So if you have a significant other that you would want to be respected as like a spouse when it comes to making your medical decisions, you need to have these health care powers of attorney. I deal with people on a regular basis who have said, well, we chose not to marry the second time, but we've been together 25 years. But so I should be able to make these decisions. His kids live in California. What do you mean they have the right to make this decision? That's what I'm talking about, okay? All right, let's keep going here. So I think probably the most important decision to communicate to your family is what we call code status. That's a medical term for what do we do when someone's heart stops or they're not breathing. So we would call that actively dying. We're not talking about you're not feeling well or you fell and you broke your hip. We're talking about end-of-life moments. When EMS is called, or you might hear code blue at the hospital. That means something's going on, that someone is imminently dying. We have to decide within a minute, what does this care look like? Does it look like full code or do not resuscitate? And I want to explain that a little bit more. When someone's heart stops, in order for us to have any chance at getting them back to a living, stable situation, I call it my three-legged stool. You have to have all these pieces together to get the heart and body re-going. You have to have oxygen in your body. So there's generally an advanced airway support. Maybe it's a breathing tube, or maybe it's an extra way of getting oxygen into your body, but oxygen. We have to circulate that oxygen by pumping on your chest and doing CPR. I think it's important that you know that it does not look like TV where somebody just kind of coughs and sits up and says, thank you, that helped. It does not look like that at all. It's pretty traumatic. We do sometimes break ribs because you've got to compress by 1.5 to 2 inches to do an effective CPR. So, but the point of that is to circulate blood within your body. If it's appropriate, they might shock your heart, trying to get it restarted. And in addition to that, they have to place an IV to get medicines into your body to quickly get those heart muscles responsive. So that's what full code looks like. All 3 pegs, it's technically 4 with the IV fluid or IV meds, but you've got to have all those together to have a chance of restarting the heart. I think it's important to realize the older we get, or the more comorbidities, that's a fancy term for you've got a long list of problems with your body. What that means is that we don't have a great record of that being successful. It's about an 8% chance of success for people who have lots, advanced age and chronic things going on with their body. If it's a young, healthy athlete who just happens to, their heart stops on the football field, we have a much better success rate. But as we get older and the rest of our bodies aren't doing so well, CPR is not often helpful. What the best case scenario for someone who gets CPR would be for them to get stabilized, get to the hospital, and they generally wake up in ICU a couple of days later if there's no other complications. Any questions about that? Let me just stop right there, specifically to full code and what that looks like. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
What is in between? I mean, we're seeing one extreme and the other in the explanation, but what about something in between?
So if someone is in between, then this would not apply to them. So if their heart is either stopped or not. And so if someone's heart is beating and they don't need these things versus death, then that's not applicable to code like this level of care. If someone is just, really sick, maybe they can get to the hospital and do ICU level type of interventions to help them, but this is talking about moments within dying. And so if someone opts to not do those things, then the alternative is what we call do not resuscitate. So if EMS is called in and you have the DNR Advance Directive, which we'll talk about a little bit more in detail, then they will not do the pump on the chest and the oxygen in your lungs and IV fluids. They will make sure you're comfortable. They will try to have your family with you. It doesn't mean they do nothing, but it looks like a very different type of intervention, and death is the result if you don't do those things. Yes, ma'am.
If you have somebody whose heart stops and you call 911, how much time do you have?
Very good question. The brain starts dying after 3 minutes without oxygen. So that's why our success rate isn't great. So if someone calls 911 and starts CPR pretty quickly, we get the AED. I mean, it's a whole nother, level class of what we do for emergency management. But if they get quick care, then we have a pretty good chance of not only restarting their heart, but them not having oxygen depravity as a result. There are many times we get the heart restarted only 3 to 4 days later to realize the brain did not get oxygen for an extended amount of time, and it's still an end-of-life situation. Okay, so we're going to kind of flip the focus to the do not resuscitate. This is for someone who says, take good care of me, take me to the hospital, but when that time comes that my heart has stopped, I do not want those heroics. I want to be made comfortable. I want nature to take its course, understanding that death is the consequence, okay? If that would be your wish, you need a medical order for the EMS team not to do those things. So Brian did a great job of talking about living wills and setting up your wishes and communicating that with family, but that at the end of the day, none of that is a provider order. By provider, I mean a physician, a nurse practitioner, or a physician's assistant. One of those three need to sign this orange form up here. So that is what you would need to give, or not you, but your advocate, whoever called 911 on your behalf, that is what they would give EMS to not do those things. Because, like I said, we have just a few minutes to decide what we're doing. Are we doing everything, or are we focusing on comfort? We don't have time to have a family meeting to look at your advanced directives. We have to do one or the other. So from an EMS standpoint, when they arrive, it's either do you have this orange form, or if not, we're going to do all these heroics, get you to the hospital, and figure it out later if we're successful. Does that make sense? This form is signed, I will get your question in just 1 second. This form is signed by your medical provider. You do not have to sign this, but you do need to have a conversation with a trusted provider that knows you, and it's not just a, I have seen a lot of conversations that I feel are very guided. Like if I came to you and I said, you want a DNR, don't you? Yeah, maybe. I don't know, it sounds like I need one. So someone that you feel like understands your philosophy of care and understands the complexity of your health, and you've had a conversation about it, then they sign it. I recommend getting 3 copies, because if you take a picture of it, I'm sorry, let me clarify. 3 originals, because if you copy it or take a picture, you've got to have the original for it to be a valid doctor's order to give EMS or whomever. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so, for example, I have one, but I've changed doctors now. Do I need to get a new one by my current doctor?
No, ma'am. Nope.
And also, we don't carry those around in our pockets. So if I'm out walking the dog and I, have a heart attack outside, who's going to run back into my apartment to find my orange paper, which is hanging in my
You know, you're going to think I'm crazy, but you could put one on your little walker packet if you wanted to. But what I tell people is keep one on your refrigerator at home. That's where EMS within the community go to look for it. If you don't want to look at it every day, I understand that. So put at least some type of a note, Advance Directives in drawer, or look on top of fridge, but someplace at the refrigerator to guide EMS where to look for them. The second original, I would want you to keep in your glove box of your car. So if you're maybe you ride with a special friend to most of your doctors, or your children provide transportation, just keep one in their glove box, wherever you spend most of your time. And then the third original, keep with your medical documents. So you've got a couple, okay? It is state specific. I just want to make a note of that so that if you, most states recognize other states, powers of attorney and these medical orders, but I do want you to understand it is a North Carolina state. So if you were going to, spend some time in Florida or something like that, you might just want to make sure that that's agreeable. What's your question in the back?
So you asked, or you stated that, okay, so EMS is coming to me, I want to get to the hospital so they can take good care of me, but they're making a decision on whether I need to be treated or left to pass on. So if this is on my refrigerator and they're not going to do anything to get me to that hospital safely, how does that work?
So it depends on what level they find you at. So if when they get there, your heart is still beating, but you're really sick, that DNR does not mean do not treat. They're going to get you to the hospital and do what they can do. But if when they get there, your heart's not beating and you're not breathing, then that's where that comes into play. Yes, ma'am. Kimberly? Sorry, there you go. The question was, would a social worker here be an appropriate person to give a copy to? And I'm not sure how Givens would approach that.
Thank you. It's a really good idea to have that discussion with your social worker, but I think what's most important is you have it in place on the refrigerator, in the glove box, and you've had the discussion with your family.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about, I'm sorry, yes, ma'am.
Where do you get one of these orders?
Very good question. Any medical provider, so your primary care, you just need to know to ask for it. Ideally, these things should be discussed as part of your annual Medicare Wellness visit. But I've done family practice. I know how hard it is. You've got very limited time to do a whole lot of work. So sometimes if it's not advocated by you, it kind of gets to the side of less priority. And so you can just call your doctor's office and say, do you have this form? Generally, before they'll sign it, they want to have some kind of conversation with you about it, though. I think that's appropriate. Okay. So alternatively, yeah.
I have a Cincinnati attorney.
Mm-hmm.
His directive has to be assigned in North Carolina because he's a Cincinnati attorney.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to come and sign it and have it notarized here.
Right. Not the medical forms, because attorney wouldn't have anything to do with these, but your power of attorney. Yeah, so yeah, that's a very good point. So if you've done your powers of attorney in another state, it's worthwhile just to do a checkup and make sure, Brian can speak more to that, but it is worthwhile to do a checkup and make sure that you've got what you need to make them valid where you are now. Okay.
It has to be notarized, as I understand it, in this state.
Notarized within North Carolina. Okay, thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about a different form. It's called a most form. Yay, it worked. Last time the pink didn't show up. So I'm sorry, I know it's not the best quality. And I do have a couple of originals if you just want to look at them. We don't pass them out because someone could technically forge them. I know that y'all would never do that, but that's why they say you can't just pass these out. But this form is what we call a medical order for scope of treatment. That's what MOST stands for. And so the intent of this form is for you and your medical provider to have a more direct conversation about how you interpret what your living will says. So when you fill out these forms of I want Joe to be my person, and behind that, I do want this, I don't want that, regarding the details of your care. Like Brian mentioned, a lot of times they leave it vague so that there's room for interpretation, because there's no way to incorporate every possible medical situation you could come across. So things like an incurable disease. Well, could you treat that cancer and survive? I don't know. Could this stroke have improvement in 6 months? I don't know. So there's a lot of really great areas about how to interpret that living will. And so this form it's a total of 5 questions. So when I approach this form with my patients, I say, I'm going to ask you these 5 questions. If you feel clearly you know what you would want about all 5 of these, then we're going to fill out this form just so that it's a way of communicating to all your medical team. So if you go to the emergency room, they know what you want. If you take it to your oncologist, they know what you want. If you take it to your social worker, they know what you want. We really like it because it's easy to amend. So my life looks this way now. 6 months from now, there might be some medical changes to where these decisions might look different. And if you have those changes, it's as simple as you and your medical provider fill out the form, and the newer date supersedes the other, and it goes away. You don't have to involve notaries and a whole new, living will to update where life reflects your goals right now. And so the 5 questions are, just for your knowledge, the first question is what to do when your heart stops. So we've kind of covered that. Full code versus do not resuscitation. Okay, or do not resuscitate, excuse me. So full code versus DNR. That's the first question. The second question would be, are you still finding it helpful to go to the hospital? And people ask me, like, that's just a really weird question. Why would you ever say no to that? I have dealt with lots of people with chronic conditions that they're in and out of the hospital every other month. When they go, it has a lot of burden. They don't find it helpful. All they're doing is treating maybe their discomfort, but they're not actually fixing the problem. You mentioned heart failure. That's a very classic example of they're in and out all the time. There may come a time when they're like, I'm done. I don't want to go back to the hospital. But from the second question on this form is saying, is going to the hospital okay, or are we trying to avoid going to the hospital? Someone had asked about hospice and palliative care. Just to clarify, just because I'm a palliative care at heart person, I want you to understand that palliative is not hospice. Those are 2 very different approaches. Palliative can take care of someone at any point within their disease process with a focus on quality of life. So they have taken care of my 21-year-old niece with metastatic cancer to treat her pain, her cough, all those things. They also took care of my dad who had end-stage liver disease. Age, disease does not matter. Palliative care can come in to help with these complex medical decision-making. They can come in to help with symptom management. There may come a time that hospice is appropriate, and they can absolutely pass the baton to hospice. But they're 2 different programs, and I think it's really important that people understand that, because there's a lot of people who are fearful of the word palliative because they think it's hospice, and it's not. Hospice is different in the fact that those are folks who don't want to go to the hospital. It's a different level of support at home so that we can manage their symptoms at home. And understanding that their philosophy of care is very much on this side of no intervention, let nature take its course, okay? So sorry, that's a little bit of a rabbit hole, but that is, hi. So first question, what to do in case your heart stops. Second question, is going to the hospital helpful for you now or not? For most, the answer to that would be yes. The third question is can we give you IV fluids on a case-by-case basis? Is that okay? The fourth question is, are antibiotics helpful to you? There may come a time where, have you ever heard the term pneumonia is the old man's best friend? There may come a time that antibiotics don't actually help your quality of life. They might prolong your death, but they don't promote quality of life. And so there's a reason sometimes to limit antibiotics and IV fluids, so that's why those are even on there. And the very last question is how to answer about artificial nutrition. So if I can eat and drink on my own, this is not applicable. these questions about artificial nutrition come into place if I maybe am very weak because of a surgery or an infection, or I dealt with a lot of folks, when we get the flu, our arms and legs get really weak. Well, so do your swallowing muscles. And when that happens, food gets into the lung where it should not be, as well as saliva, and that's called aspiration. If that happens long enough, inflammation of the lung tissues and or pneumonia set in, and it becomes a life-threatening condition for people. And so that's why we have to bypass that swallow as a extraordinary means to keep that person healthy and alive as long as possible. So if you're in a hospital setting, they'll do what they call a temporary feeding tube that goes in your nose, down your throat, through the stomach, and into the small intestine. And that's a way where we can give them temporary hydration, nutrition, medications, those types of things. But maybe someone's had a stroke or someone's having radiation to their throat. This is not a quick 2-week turnaround. This is a more prolonged need for nutrition. Then that's when we do what we call a permanent feeding tube. It's a false term. It can come out. It's not permanent, but the idea is it can be used on a permanent basis, on a long-term basis if needed. And we call it a G tube, a PEG tube, all kinds of different words for it, but it's the kind that goes directly into the stomach or small intestine, depending on what kind of tube they're doing. But the idea is that it's a tube that goes directly here so they can continue to get nutrition and hydration. It does not prevent saliva from getting into your lungs. It does not prevent reflux from getting into your lungs. So none of these are fail-proof solutions, but they're the best we can do in what otherwise would be an end-of-life situation for that person. I think it's important to also mention what I call comfort feeds. So some people would say, because when you have these types of tubes, you don't eat and drink by mouth. So when all they want is their cup of coffee, or why can't I have ice cream? That's a quality of life issue for people. And so the alternative would be to say, let's not do those tubes. Let's let you eat and drink what you want. We call that comfort feeds. We try to make it soft. We try to have you sit up. We try to have you, do all the mechanical things we can to help set you up for success. But some of that's going to go the wrong way. And when it does, that will be a life-shortening process to your body. But at the end of the day, it's a quality of life. How do I eat and drink what I want and do things on my terms for whatever time I have? And again, that goes back to that continuum of care. Are we full speed ahead, or are we let nature take its course? And that's a complex medical decision. I would ask, if you do fill this form out with your primary care, or whichever medical provider you fill it out with, keep this with, if you have the DNR order, that orange sheet that I showed you, thank you. If you have that, keep these together. A little page protector, I'm talking about those clear page protectors, keeping them together on your refrigerator, so if EMS comes in, you fall, you break your hip, heaven forbid, they can grab those off your fridge together, and they've got all your medical needs in one place to travel with you, okay? And like the DNR, this is a state-specific form. Other forms in other states, some of them call it a PULSE, or there's lots of different names, but it's the same intent. And lastly, I would just say it is a gift. I'm just kind of reiterating what Brian said. This is a way that you can teach your family, your friends, whomever is in your circle of influence, how to do this final phase of life, how to not avoid these hard conversations. We laugh because, but I had, not laughing because of this, but my father-in-law passed away before we could get his DNR form. So we had to basically beg the EMS not to do CPR because we had the appointment Friday, but his heart stopped Thursday. And so EMS luckily called the ER and said, they got basically a verbal order from the doctor over the phone. But it gave me this kind of champion about, please get your forms, please have them available. But as a result of that, I went to my family and I said, we're having a paper party, y'all. I said, it's really important to me that this not happen to someone else I love. I know better. This is what I do. But sometimes taking care of my family isn't, these aren't comfortable conversations you just have. So you take some intention. And so sometimes just saying, hey, let's do these together. I am 44, but I have taken care of 44-year-olds who have been in a car accident in the hospital, and so I have a healthcare power of attorney. I have a durable power of attorney. I made sure my kid has what she needs moving forward. So I don't care what age you are or what health you are in. These are super important things to do. Thank you. Any questions? I know we've kept y'all for a while today. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thanks for staying long. This was a really important time together. And I further thought on your question about should you tell the social worker, oh yes, please do. But I wanted to encourage you, it needs to be on the fridge, because when EMS bursts into your home, they have that minute to make that quick decision. But yes, it's always nice to connect with the social work team and say, I have my wishes in order, and I want you to know too. Thank you again for this time. I'm going to quickly go around the room and let you hear from the vendors, and then we'll be done for the day. Thanks. This is Pat, and she's with SOS Dental.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here today. I appreciate that honor. We provide a weekly preventative oral care. I'm with SOS Senior Oral Health Services. We come to you. You don't have to worry about traveling. Our service is designed to be able to go to the person that might need some weekly preventative oral care. We do a thorough cleaning, we use interdental aids, and we also do fluoride. We work with your family, we also work with the facility. Mainly we work with people that have lost that ability to brush and remove the plaque and bacteria, and maybe they have cognitive issues, Parkinson's, that type of thing. So if you're interested, I have some information up here. Please feel free to come up afterwards and get one of my rack cards or business cards. Thank you.
Thank you so much. She's got chapstick up here.
Oh, and I do have a chapstick to give away.
And then Kelly has her table with memory care, so I hope you'll come and visit with her afterwards. And I'm going to make a quick trip across the room. So one of the really fun things is our speaker for February is here, so you can preview and meet Kim, and I'll let her share a little bit about her table.
Thank you, Kimberly. Hi, my name is Kim Schaefer. I'm a registered nurse and a certified health coach, and I specialize in heart health. And I support and guide my clients in managing and maintaining their heart health and even minimizing their risk for heart disease. A lot of people think that as we get older, we don't have any control over our heart health, but that's not necessarily true, because there's always something we can do every single day to help our hearts stay healthy and strong regardless of age. So in February, during Heart Month, I'm gonna, in your Learn First seminar, I am going to present information about, I'm just gonna dive deeper into heart healthy information, and I'm gonna give you examples of like presenting the concepts of primary aging and secondary aging, and how your mental and your emotional well-being directly affects your heart, and then all the lifestyle considerations, and then also your environment and some other lesser-known factors that contribute to your heart. So I'm having a raffle for a free pedometer and a coaching session, so come on up and see me. Thank you.
And Kim's got healthy snacks as well. Yes, thanks for being here. And I want to showcase Lisa Constantine. She's here with Home Care, and Jesse Bossard, who is our executive director. So thankful for them.
Hello, everyone. I think everyone has probably seen me a few times here, but I'm with Givens Home First. I oversee the home care portion of Givens Home First, and we support residents on both campuses here and at Highland Farms. We provide in-home aid services, home health or CNA services, and nursing services. So if you need anything, give us a call.
Did you know they help put up Christmas trees? Just saying. Julie Moses is here. She's also part of Home First, and her program is Aging in Place.
Hello, everyone. Julie Moses. I do home modifications. I have a technician. A lot of you know David Hawk. We are more than happy to come in and keep you safe. So it's a complimentary assessment. You can give us a call. There's a way to contact us over here or come talk to me. Thanks. Thank you, Kimberly. Thanks for the ones that stuck it out.
And then finally, Dr. Ryan Court is here with North Lake Eye.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And my name is Dr. Ryan Court. I am the co-owner of a 4-location optometry practice. We have 2 office locations here in Asheville. So one of them is located at Biltmore Park. The other one is located at Asheville Mall. We provide full scope, comprehensive eye health and vision care needs. So the one thing we don't do is provide eye surgery. We coordinate with local professionals like Asheville Eye and Carolina Ophthalmology. But if you need your eye health or vision care assessed, or you run into an eye emergency, we're open 7 days a week. So Saturday and Sunday included. I have a lot of people that will call and things happen on a Friday night and they're worried about being seen until Monday. They have concerns. They don't want to think about it over the weekend. We're here to help you in any way or capacity we can. We also take a wide range of vision and medical insurances. So happy to be a resource.
Thank you again for staying a little longer. Feel free to visit with our community providers, and I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving.